My name's Terry Rich. I'm an ornithologist and a birder, and I've been doing this pretty much my whole life. We started this program here, as I said, about 4 years, so we're at the end of our 4th year of this. And every month I try to do something a little different, depending on the season, talking about where our birds are. We usually I talk, we exchange ideas and share observations, and we always learn from each other. I always learn something from your experiences. The world of birds and the world of nature is enormous and enormously complex. And everybody has things they've learned and experienced that other people haven't. So it's cool to share that stuff. I really enjoy that part of getting together. Then we'll go outside and bird. You're welcome to go with us as long as you want, or not at all if you want to go home. And as I always say, you can go home right now if you're already tired of hearing me talk. I won't feel bad. We're all adults. Do what you like. My year's worth of talks is roughly structured this way. We've already talked about breeding birds that breed here and leave in the winter. We've talked about birds that breed north of Idaho and just migrate through, so you only see them in the spring and fall. And so this rather big group right here I want to talk about today, birds that breed north of Idaho and come here to winter, like rough-legged hawks. Altitudinal migrants, by far the best example of that are dark-eyed juncos. They're nesting in the forest, in the mountains up here, like around Boise and all the way through the mountains. And in the winter, they don't go south so much as just go down slope. And they come into our yards. And of course, a lot of these are feeder birds, and we'll look at those too. We've got a group that I call partial migrants that are like robins and mourning doves. Some years they seem to mostly leave, and some years they seem to mostly be here. I've got good numbers of robins this winter. We were just talking about that. Last winter, I couldn't find a robin to save my life. 2 years ago, I had a flock of a couple hundred that I saw routinely, like daily in my neighborhood. So very variable, and we've looked at the actual counts on the Christmas bird counts in an earlier talk, I think last fall. And when you look at those counts, you can see the numbers they just bounce up and down. Lots, none, lots, none, lots, none. Siskins and others are the same way. And then birds that don't migrate at all, that are resident species, birds that just kind of stay in the valley, and probably the best example of that is a house finch. You're always going to find house finches any month of the year. And we'll look at some numbers. So this group of birds right here, the best place to find data on these species is, as always, eBird. It just gets better and better and better. And if you go to eBird and explore, you can go down to this thing called bar charts, and that shows you month by month abundance, total counts. You can look at the data in different ways of these species. If you actually click on that, here are the bar chart. That's where this comes from. This is a very common way to display the commonness of birds by season. So you go from January, February, March through December. You got your species, and then however thick these blocks are shows you how relatively common they are. So, for example, look at house sparrow right here. They're residents. They're just equally common. Every time you go out there, you get about the same number of house sparrows. You get the migrants that I talked about earlier, like this lazuli bunting, black-headed grosbeak, that come in probably May, mid-May, maybe even some in late May. So we don't have any during the winter, but when they come back from Mexico and Central America, all of a sudden they show up usually pretty abruptly. A whole bunch of these species, individuals will pop in from the south. They stay through the breeding season, and then they trickle back out in the fall and they disappear again. So that's what the bar charts show you visually. Here's a nice example of snow goose. So you can see January, February, March, April, May, and then they're bailing out to go far north of here to breed on the tundra, and then they come back through the fall. So you can get a quick glance. You can see sort of generally when these birds are around. If you like numbers like I do, you can go down here and actually download the data behind these graphs. And I always love to show what the download looks like. And it looks just god-awful because it's a text file. But you can actually see there's actually stuff in here. There's January, there's February. It's just wrapped, and it's out to, 15 places for some bizarre reason. But when you put it into Excel, it becomes very tidy. Let's look at something we know well, say Canada goose. So here's the first week of January, second week of January, third week, fourth week, here's the first week of February, and so on. So then you can see the numbers behaving, even though they're absurdly presented, overly precise. You can, in Excel, you can convert all those to 2 decimal points or something that's more palatable. So what I wanted to do, and I just did this last week because I wanted fresh data, because eBird data is coming in continually from around the world. It's literally a continual flow of data into the database. So tomorrow it'll be better than it is today. Just look at the mean weekly frequency of December through February. So we've already talked about feeder birds, so I'll mention some of the feeder birds, but the main point today is to look at some of these species that don't come to feeders but are around. If you just look at all the frequency of occurrence of species, and this is like 400 species going out here to some that are essentially, they're so rare they look like zeros. So we're probably not too surprised for Ada County, December, January, February, for all of history, eBird history, that dark-eyed junco is the most frequently reported species. So this is I should have rounded those or slimmed these down, but this is basically 0.5. So over half of the checklists have dark-eyed juncos. And actually, I'm surprised it isn't a much higher number than that. But some days in my neighborhood, I actually don't see a junco, unless I look at my own feeder, which is very odd. That's a 3-mile walk where I may not see a junco except for my backyard. So they can be missed. Not surprisingly, number 2 is house finch. Probably not surprisingly, number 3 is Canada goose. And so as you go through the species, they become less and less and less and less common. See, it's typical of biological data to have this kind of a curve. Just a few big trees, a few more trees this size, a few more this size, lots and lots this size. Very, very common distribution in biology. So just for fun, I picked off number 92 on the list is gray-crowned Rosie finch. So it's way down here it's getting close to no gray-crowned Rosie finches. We know there are a few around. But there are many, there's another 100 species that are even less common than gray-crowned Rosie finch. And these are so uncommon we wouldn't even think of going out to find one in the winter in Boise. Things that are like wintering in Argentina or Costa Rica, we just don't expect to see them, although they ever so often, birds are like that. It doesn't matter where you are, what you got, some oddball is going to show up somewhere sooner or later. And that's the bird we go chase, of course. So I wanted to look then at this list of these most common birds that are around here and see if we could categorize them. Are they birds that are coming from the north? Are they birds that are coming down out of the mountains? Are these sort of partial migrants, or are they just our residents, our chickadees and things that are around all the time? So again, starting at the top, most common, dark-eyed junco, house finch, Canada goose, mallard, flicker, magpie, robin. You can see the occurrence dropping off fairly steeply. I mean, you get down to crow, even crow is only occurring in about a quarter of the checklists that are turned in, whereas dark-eyed juncos and house finches are occurring in about half. So crows, which I see daily in my neighborhood, are actually quite a bit less common in this is Ada County now, we're talking about Ada County, than even dark-eyed junco.
This is all Ada County data.
This is Ada County, just Ada County, yep. And December, January, February, weekly average. So then I went over here and made an attempt. It's probably too much information we could spend a couple hours walking through these and debating whether they should have these letters. So for example, we got dark-eyed junco. It's primarily a altitudinal migrant. They're mostly just coming down out of the mountains. I'm sure there's some from the north that are coming in here, but I don't know that anybody has any idea how many juncos, say, from Coeur d'Alene are wintering in Boise. Maybe none. I don't know. House finch is a resident. Canada goose, again, there might be some. We know there are some coming from the north to winter here, but we got a lot of resident geese. Same for mallards. Flickers, certainly residents, but they're also altitudinal migrants. And when I go up into the forest in the summer, I'll see flickers. Those flickers are leaving, coming down here, and so on. So you can kind of walk through these. Resident. Robins, very unpredictable. There's some that seem to be residents. There's certainly partial migrants, and we know they nest also very high in the forest, and some of those birds, they're not up there now. They're coming down into the valley. So another altitudinal migrant. And if you look at the FeederWatch top 25 list that we talked about a couple months ago, now this is a little scale mismatch because this is for all of Idaho. But you see that a lot of these birds that are occurring very commonly in Ada County, no matter where you go, are also our common feeder birds. So juncos, house finches, flickers, or not necessarily feeder birds, but seen on FeederWatch. So they're either on the feeder or in the yard when people are watching their feeders. So then you get magpies, robins, doves, starlings. You can see just about everybody in this top tier, except for these common waterfowl. My first bird species of 2019 was a red-tailed hawk sitting in the tree in my backyard. So I thought that was pretty cool. So we can keep going now. We're getting to, ever less common species. Again, now you see they're not only less common on our feeders, but they also tend to be less common in Ada County as you go down through here. So you got things you're never going to see on feeders: herons, widgeon, merganser, wood duck, goldeneye, kingfisher, gulls, ravens, kinglets, waxwing, and pigeons. A lot of residents, fewer on the feeders. Keep going down the list. Downy woodpeckers, now only seen on about 10%, I should say, 12% of the lists from Ada County. Less and less common. Still got a few feeder birds. Brown creeper, not usually in the top 25 for Idaho on FeederWatch, but some years it shows up. So we're getting right under the fringe of the feeder birds now. And then a few more feeder birds that are just only occasionally in the top 25 in the whole state: mountain chickadees, bohemians, and spotted towhees. And then again, more birds that don't come to feeders: residents, altitudinal migrants, kind of a mix of characteristics. We've got a few that I haven't really addressed, these gulls. I don't know what to call them exactly. So we've got these two gulls, Californian herring gull, that have not been in my talks because they don't fit into any of the really kind of clean categories. And they're getting very, very uncommon, 5% and 2% of the list showing these birds. And I think this is the last, is this the last one? Yeah, so, this keeps going down, like I said, to essentially zero. It's interesting that we know these western screech owls are residents in the valley. And we were lucky enough to have some in our yard last year. I just got the video camera all but hooked up for this next year, hoping they come back. So they're all around, but just look how rarely they're actually detected. So I thought maybe I'd see something really striking out of these data if I looked at just the average over all the species, but not really. So if you look at all the altitudinal migrants, there's 20 species. They're occurring on about 14% of the checklists that turn in. If you look at just the residents, about 18%. Migrants from the north, about 14%. FeederWatch, 21%. And of course, this is biased because we're already just looking at the top 25. And then the rest of them about 0.11. So I really thought that when you looked at the feeder birds, you're going to say, half the lists have always got these feeder birds. They're always there. It's not the case. So they're really spread out pretty evenly among these sort of different ecological behaviors, migratory strategies. Seems to be fairly equally distributed among those different categories. One last data graph, and then we'll look at bird pictures. So I don't know if you're familiar with correlations, but if you've got a perfect relationship between two sets of data, this will be a 1, which means perfect. If it's 0, that means there's no relationship whatsoever. This is 0.28. That's getting down to no relationship whatsoever. But thank God we get bailed out. So down here is eBird occurrence. So as the bird gets more and more common, it's going to be way over here on this end of the graph. And FeederWatch rank, the highest FeederWatch ranks are here, and then less and less common on FeederWatch. So to explain that, yay, always dark-eyed juncos, they're always there, right? So dark-eyed juncos are the most commonly detected bird in Ada County in the winter, as I already showed you. They're also number 1 in FeederWatch. And if you saw my feeder talk, for the last 20 years, they're number one. Every year, they're number one in Idaho. No, even house finches never bump them off. It's the only species that is always in the same ranking. It's always number one. So here it is. Most common in Ada County, most common on feeders. No surprise, probably, house finch number two. Most common in Ada County, most common on feeders. So that's not, I mean, that's kind of maybe what you'd expect. But so what I'm looking for are the things that kind of that you maybe didn't expect. And thankfully, a red-breasted nuthatch fits the bill. So here's red-breasted nuthatch. It's the third most common FeederWatch bird, right? So it's almost just barely behind these guys. But look, it's way back here. So it's only found on about 15% of the checklist for the county. So the story is, if you want to see nuthatches, go hang out by feeders, right? They really seem to be attracted to feeders as opposed to just be knocking around wherever. And then you can look at a few others. Here's robin. It's about where it's supposed to be, about on the line, and song sparrow. And the sharp-shinned hawk is exactly where it's supposed to be. So you basically say your chance of seeing it in your yard while you're watching your feeder is the same as your chance of seeing it just knocking around somewhere in Ada County. Equally probable. All right, there's another old school way to think about the abundance of birds, and this is pre-eBird. And this is the Birds of Idaho Field Checklist. This is a way everybody on the planet used to keep track and categorize the commonness of birds, pre-eBird. I'm getting ready to give it a plug here because there's some things, and it just shows you all the species. I know you can't read it, so let's blow it up. So the cool thing about this is sort of a comprehensive assessment of the occurrence of species in Idaho. That's a mix of data and of professional judgment, opinion, and experience with people like RL who breed, and Alex. I don't know if you've been involved in the checklist, but there are a lot of people who've just been birding all over Idaho for a very long time, and sometimes professional judgment, well, I should say sometimes, professional judgment can, I think, always add to a picture you're trying to paint with data. The data gets you a long way, and I love eBird, and you saw you can do all kinds of things with it. But to take the data and then sit down with people around a table and say, okay, let's categorize these species. So what the pros do then, they use the terms resident, migrant, winter, and summer. Then there's an abundance, from abundant to accidental. Accidental is one or two accepted records in history. So this is getting down to those that are essentially zero in the eBird occurrence. And then they also add the regions, statewide, southeast, southwest, central, and panhandle. So for each of these species then, like when you're going to Florida, I mean, this is not a bad thing to look for too. Their seasonal abundance checklist of the area you're going to. And you can, and I'll show you a few examples of these categories, what they look like on particular species. The other thing I wanted to show in conjunction with these categorizations are the species maps from eBird. And so, for example, we'll start with this beautiful merlin. I had two in my neighborhood a couple weeks ago. I haven't seen one for a couple weeks now, but there are two in the same spruce tree, which is really cool. I've never seen two at once before. So here are the categorizations, and they've got two for this guy. So we got summer. 4 is what? Rare or very local. Oh, I already put that there. Okay. So summer, rare, statewide. And certainly if you go up into the forest, in the forests of Idaho in the summer, backpacking or camping, if you knock around enough, you'll run into breeding merlins up there. They separate this category, this summer, from migration and winter, where it becomes a little less, a little more common, I should say. Let me say it that way, a little more common. 3, migration, winter, it's only uncommon instead of rare, and again, statewide. So these guys can be found almost anywhere. It's a good way at a glance to figure out what your odds are of seeing a merlin without digging into eBird data or looking at graphs. And then you go to the eBird maps, and these will all be the same. They're scaled in the same way. So here's Boise. Here's the southwest corner of Idaho, just for orientation here. Here's Boise. And so if you haven't looked at eBird species maps, the darker the purple, the more commonly they've been seen. And again, this is December, February. So I just clipped it. You can clip it to any months you like. You can look at all years. You can look at the last 10 years, whatever you like. So this is December, February, same as the other stuff. All years, Merlins. So you can see the darker means more Merlins. Lighter purple means fewer. Gray means people were birding there and they turned in a checklist, but there was no Merlin on it. And white means nobody turned in any checklists from that area in those months. And in passing, I should say, one of the things that eBird has been trying to get birders to do is fill up what they call the white space and the white time. Well, this is literally the white space. Nobody's, if I'm reading this correctly, no one has turned in a checklist from December, January, February from these blocks. It seems hard to imagine. But there's Silver City. These are snowy mountains, so unless you're very deliberately going out there, people aren't just tending to turn in checklists. So what eBird would really like us to do is go to these places and bird, in this case, December, February, where nobody's turning in counts. I forgot I was running this in quiz mode. Everybody know what bird this is? Rough-legged hawk. Gorgeous, gorgeous hawk. So migrant in winter. These guys are breeding on the tundra. So they're just coming. As compared to Merlins, note that roughlegs over time in the winter, as we were just saying, pretty common. I mean, look at these really dark, lots of dark purple squares where people are finding lots of roughlegs over time. And generally through the whole Snake River Plain, pretty good occurrence of roughlegs. Once again, showing the same background data where nobody's counting birds. So this should be white in the same, in every one of these should be the same because people just haven't turned in checklists from those blocks. Another one of my favorites, and this bird is gray-crowned Rosie Finch. Remember, number 92 in abundance on our Ada County list. So it's down there quite a ways. Again, two categories because these guys are breeding up. If you want to see them breeding, you got to go up high in the mountains in the summertime, backpacking up on the tundra, looking around cliffs. You'll find Rosie Finches. And then they leave that and come down, altitudinal migrant. So summer, still classified as rare or very local because they need vertical cliffs up on the tundra to nest. So if you don't have some kind of structure, even if you have a lot of expansive tundras, high meadows, that's not what they're looking for. They need the rock faces to nest in. So they're not rare so much as very local. The habitat they want is only in certain places in the high mountains. Central, so all those central mountains have got Rosie Finches. Then you switch gears, come into the winter. Uncommon, again, I would say local. If you kind of know where they hang out, we talked about it last month, some out by Discovery Park in the lava cliffs. They're local. Again, they need those particular habitats. You'll find them. Uncommon, I think, is generous. I would say rare and local myself, but you could argue about that. That's why you get people around the table and argue about these things. And you can see them anywhere in the state. And maybe actually more showing up than I would have guessed if you look at the purple blocks over time in the winter, here and there around the valley. Close relative. My favorite bird, I started out to do a master's on this species in 1974 at Idaho State University. And my wife, who's not a biologist, and trudged with me, backpacked with me in the Tetons, the Lemhis, the Lost River Range, Yellowstone. And the logistics of studying this bird were just crushing, and I just couldn't get to them, really. They're like up on a big cliff, and I couldn't really gather any interesting data except that, hey, they're in big cliffs in the tundra. Well, we already knew that. I switched to sage sparrows the next summer, where you just walk around in the sagebrush on flat ground and they're all across the landscape. It's like, okay, now I'm getting data. But that was a memorable summer. Would you not agree?
Oh, yes.
She never put on a backpack again. She's like, not doing that. I guess I should add the last anecdote. one of the last field visits we made over in the Tetons was a really good place to see the black rosy finches. Rendezvous Mountain, you know, the tram that comes up from the Jackson side to Rendezvous. Those cliffs right below there have got black rosy finches. It's a really good place to see them quite well. Well, when I was scouting that out on one of our trips, and we were camping up in the Krumholtz on top of Rendezvous, and I came on a body, and it kind of put a damper on things. Turned out this guy young man had dropped off his daughter at, remember Outward Bound? Dropped off his daughter at Outward Bound and been hiking up there and slipped on a snowfield and slid down and hit his head. I'll never forget it. I didn't get too close. It was very creepy. And that night was one of the creepiest nights I ever spent. The cool thing was, though, I got a helicopter ride because when I went to the tram and talked to the sheriff and they said, okay, show us where it is. So I took the tram back down and I got in a helicopter and I was like, okay, I love helicopter rides. So I'm right in front of Grand, right, going like this in a helicopter. That was definitely worth the price of admission. So anyway, after we found out his story, I didn't feel so bad. And I didn't feel like I should have been haunted by this poor guy. Anyway, so black rosy finches. Rare, resident, I'm not sure about that. They're altitudinal migrants, but I guess they don't leave the state, so we'll call them a resident. And central, southeast, southwest, so everywhere but the panhandle, you can get the black rosy finches. So the black rosy finches are much less widely distributed as breeders than the gray crowns. Gray crowns are clear out in the Aleutians and down through the Rockies, and the blacks are much more local. And the third rosy finch, the brown rosy finch, is even more local than that, but we don't have them here. They're in Colorado. So not nearly as many as gray crowns, but there's some blacks. And if you want to see a black rosy finch, talk to Ariel. He can tell you exactly where to look. Okay, a few more. Anybody know what that is? It's a shrike. Northern shrike. So another bird that's a migrant in this area is coming out of the northern taiga, coming out of Alaska, coming out of the northern shrub and forest country. Only here in the winter, uncommon or local, and they could be anywhere in the state. And then here's loggerhead. And loggerhead actually has 3 categories. Not too many of these species have 3 different assessments for Idaho. So you've got this uncommon summer in the southwest, you know, and if you go down anywhere in the southwest in the juniper, sagebrush country and drive around for a while, you'll see loggerheads, probably several. After breeding season, here we are in the panhandle and the central, so much less common north of here. They're really southwestern birds. And in the winter, rare, very local statewide. So they can show up in the winter as well as northern shrikes. So that's a W4S, W3S. So rarer than northern shrikes. I mean, we're getting pretty uncommon here. A quick look at the shrikes is sort of like the telling a Sharpie from a coop when you first start looking at them. These northern shrikes are longer, have a larger beak, and the really good field mark, if you can see it, is this black mask right here on the loggerhead goes all the way across the bill, and on the northern it doesn't. There's a break right here. But this can be really hard to see in my experience. Even when the bird's looking straight at you, you have to have a really good view to see if that band is solid or not. I think better field marks for me are this. It really looks long-tailed to me. Northern shrikes look much longer tailed than a loggerhead. Here's another picture of that little mask, whether it's complete or broken. So if he's looking straight at you, you have a shot. If not, you might not see it. But like I said, they're longer, and this tail always looks quite obviously longer, and even the bill to some degree. And the golden crowns and white crowns are very similar, same genus, big sparrows with really contrasty bills. But these golden crowns have this little patch right here, even on the immatures, that shows up pretty well, and a bicolored bill as opposed to a solid sort of horn-colored bill. The upper mandible is a little darker. So I guess we always, when we see a group of white-crowned sparrows, most of us will look fairly closely at every individual and see if you can pick out a golden crown or a Harris's. Much less commonly showing up. Look at how unusual. So here again, these are all places where people have been birding in December, January, February, and not seeing golden crown sparrows. So it's just a couple spots where they show up. Migration, winter, uncommon or local. Again, I would say local is a better descriptor. Showing up anywhere in the state, coming off the tundra where they breed. And we know, most of us know that if you really want to see snow buntings, take the road through Fairfield, and especially right as you climb up that last hill and hit the high plateau, that rocky bit of road before you start running out across the high flat and marsh area up there. That's a good place to see snow buntings, and you can see really all across there is a good place to see snow buntings. Harris's sparrow, there were, a month ago there were 3 just over here by the pond, hanging out with some white crowns. I guess there's still 1. So this is a real prize, again, a very extreme northern species that winters mostly down through the Great Plains. So again, a lot of these things are rare or very local. It's probably rare and local. They're just here and there. You've got to be a little bit lucky. So yeah, you can run into them, but they're not a lot of places where nobody's seeing them in the winter. We'll go over and try to find one here in a few minutes. One of my favorite birds that used to be really reliable up just south of Bellevue by the Silver Creek Preserve, if you know where that is, south of Sun Valley, gyrfalcon. Same kind of categorization, migrant and winter, rare, very local, can show up anywhere in the state. And if you see a gyrfalcon, you're not likely to confuse it with some other falcon. They're absolutely stunningly graceful and beautiful. I think really long tail, long wings. They fly. They look like, wow, I don't know what, swallows maybe or something, like giant predatory swallows. They're really magnificent. And I wish we had a few more hanging around. So here's the spot. Let's see, where are we? Yeah, Richfield. I'm not quite sure which one of these is. Yeah, there's the river valley. So this is where I've seen them right here in Silver Creek Preserve. I don't know if they're around this winter or not. Anybody seen a gyr? Heard about a gyr?
Well, I don't know, but
So anyway, your odds of seeing one around here look like it's pretty slim. Just a few more. Common redpoll, same categories as the last several. Rare, local, wintering bird here. So I just showed you common redpoll. Hoary redpoll, even rarer, more rare. We're at casual, which is like, you're not going to see this bird probably. These birds, the place where I saw hoaries and commons rather well recently was in Fort Collins on a feeder. In fact, I think that's my picture. Rocky Mountain, or now it's called the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies in Fort Collins, has a bunch of feeders, and they're just swarming with redpolls. It's on the Front Range, and I guess they like coming down through there. There's a lot of ways talking about how to tell these two apart, and we had probably 60 or 70, about half and half, and I didn't think I was ever sure which one I was looking at. And in fact, last year in Living Bird, the magazine come out of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, there was a very nice story that shows that these birds really grade from large bills with quite a bit of red to small bills with no red, and it's almost a complete gradation. So I don't think they've done the DNA yet, but it's probably one species. I think that's the way that's going to shake out. So there's common redpoll being reported here and there. Hoary redpoll, again, basically not probably going to see them. And now with the taxonomic issues, I don't know what you report exactly. All right. How about snowy owls? Any snowy owls this year? I know they got a few in the east early in the winter, but I mean New England, but I haven't heard of any around here. Same categorizations, rare and very local. And we're always hopeful. A few years ago, there were, 1 or 2 out at Deer Flat. I think everybody ran out there to see them. They like airports, big lakes, lake shores, big wide open spaces. I mean, they're tundra breeding birds, and it seems like they seek out that kind of habitat. It strikes me that the entire Snake River Plain is that type of habitat, really low, really open. So I would never be surprised to have a snowy owl show up. And they're not going to be around these trees and bushes, but way out in big, flat, wide open spaces. I think it's worth scanning fence posts for snowy owls anytime you're out there in the winter. We're talking about chasing rare birds, leaving the Christmas count. I got to share this short story. A few years ago, I was down in Manaus in Brazil in the Amazon birding, and two of the people that were with our small group were from Great Britain, very serious birders. Well, while we were there in the middle of the Amazon, they got word that some species had shown up in England that had never been seen in England before. They just about flew back to see it. I mean, that's a very, very serious chaser, lister, twitcher, all these derogatory terms for people who I was sitting there as they were discussing what it would cost, and then they were going to come back and finish the tour in Brazil. They just wanted to fly up their ticket and come back at cost of thousands of dollars. So be careful. This birding can lead you into very eccentric behavior if you're not careful. So again, snowy owls, don't bet your life you're going to see one in Idaho in the winter, although it does happen. There's the bird's probably at Deer Flat from a few years ago now. Oh, just a few more for fun. I ski a lot, so I'm always looking for blue grouse or a dusky grouse when I'm up at Bogus. Almost never see them. They're residents, they're hanging around up in the snow. I've seen them in the snow. They're sitting up in the trees when the snow's this deep. They're up in the trees eating buds and somehow surviving up there. So you can see them in the winter if you get up high. They don't seem to want to come down in the valley. They're not like Rosie Finches and Juncos that say, to heck with it, I'm going to come down the valley and run around with the quail. They just live up there, which is pretty amazing. I think that's my sighting right there from 2 years ago. And somebody else saw some over there. A few more fun facts. I've worked on a number of conservation plans that look at, in this case, all the birds of North America at one time and try to make conservation assessments. And one of the kind of cool data things we thought up a few years ago was trying to figure out, these are bird conservation regions, they're sort of planning units for bird conservation, was to figure out this idea of stewardship. So you pick a species and you say, okay, who in the United States has most of these, whatever the species is? Who has the most? They should know that they have the most so that even if they're common, they don't overlook them. So if you've got all the robins might be common, but you should know you've got them all. And Mississippi isn't going to save robins. This is just a hypothetical, obviously. Texas isn't going to save robins. You've got the robins. So be paying attention to the robins. Don't ignore them just because they're common. So we were trying to figure out ways to look at this. And I just want to show you two examples that I thought was pretty cool. So I'm going to talk about Bird Conservation Region 9, which is the Great Basin, which extends way up into the Okanagan. That's maybe overmapped a little bit, but that sagebrush country goes clear up in here into the Okanagan of Canada, and of course most of Nevada, the Snake River Plain, and so on. So if you look at this region, guess which bird we have the most of, more than anybody else in the winter. This is January for February. Northern flicker. So we've got 32% of the northern flickers that exist in January and February, and that's the max. No other part of the United States or of North America literally has more flickers in the winter. So I see flickers every day, and I kind of think of them as like, they're not as numerous as house finches, but yeah, if I don't see a flicker, it's like, what's going on? What's wrong? Well, that's because this is where most of them are in this geographic region right here.
Is the number of birds or the frequency of detection?
This is, good question. This is number of birds. This is total. This is based on population estimates, which is a different thing than, I talk about population estimates in another talk, than relative occurrence. So, and then one other example, just for fun, the other part of Idaho, this is the part that Sean Finn runs for USGS, is this whole giant northern Rockies. So it goes from the Blue Mountains, all of central Idaho, down in here, pretty big region of the Rockies right here. So the number one bird of responsibility for that region is red-breasted nuthatch. So 22.2% of all the red-breasted nuthatches in the world in January and February are in this region right here. So those are just examples. We're not necessarily going to go out and do something about flickers and red-breasted nuthatches, but now we have these data They've been presented to the people who manage the lands and run the conservation in these various polygons to say, hey, you've got all of this, you've got the most of that. Make sure you're not overlooking them. All right, that ended abruptly. So I am finished talking, yay, right at 10 o'clock, I can't believe it. If you want to go birding with us, we'll take a few minutes to gather our stuff and probably go straight over here and look for that Harris's sparrow.